Hello and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. And this is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of this week's top stories. Thanks for joining us. I'm Peter Ndoro and this is what's coming up on the show. The Competition Commission has decided not to prosecute two media houses in the subscription television market for complaints of abuse of dominance. Find out what action the Commission has decided to go with instead. Now, an interesting study has revealed that South African internet users spend a third more time online, wait for this, than Americans, and almost double the Germans. We'll be unpacking what impact that may have on traditional media. But before we engage with our panel for all of that, let's take a look at your Sunday newspaper headlines. Starting with the Sunday Times, which is leading with a story about how controversial media owner Iqbal Survey has been using the bank account of one of his companies, which received billions of rand in government pension money, as his personal piggy bank. The City Press is carrying a story about how President Cyril Ramaphosa and his government are looking to cut the public service wage bill, and to this end plan to entice civil servants who want to leave with attractive settlement offers. The Sunday Independent is running with a story about how the Hawks assured the country this week that more arrests would follow after the elite unit failed to arrest Bosasa Chief Executive Gavin Watson, despite prosecutors identifying him as key in the controversial company's criminal enterprise. And the KwaZulu-Natal's Sunday Tribune is leading with a story about how R1 trillion over 20 years could pour into the country if a gas discovery in the Otonikwa Basin off the southern Cape Coast is tapped. And Cape Town's Weekend Argus is reporting on how the family of former South Africa's Got Talent winner James Bemji is living in fear following the murder of his sister 3 weeks after his son was gunned down. Right, to help us unpack all of this and much more, my guests today are Tandy Smith, researcher at Media Monitoring Africa. Thanks very much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you. And also we have the chairperson of the National Press Council, Joss Charlie. Thanks very much for joining us and welcome to you.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Okay, we've got a lot to get through. Quite interesting, actually. So let's start. Now, this week, a new study has revealed how South African internet users spend a third more time online than our American counterparts, and get this, almost double that of Germans. Social media marketing platform Hootsuite's Global State of Digital in 2019 report found that the typical South African internet user spent 8 hours and 23 minutes on the internet per day, and that's compared to 7 hours 2 minutes in Singapore, 6 hours 38 minutes in the US, and that was what the report found. Okay, so both of you, did that surprise you? Let's start with you, Tandy. Is that quite surprising?
It was actually quite surprising when I heard it. When I found out that that was the statement, I actually, needed to go in and check what the research was, because you sort of think, well, is that really possible? And there are a lot of questions that came with it that I hope we get into about, well, what does that mean? Does that equal to the access that we have? And if not, why not? Who are these people who are these people spending so much time, and what are they spending time on the internet doing? All
right, well, I can tell you that I think our internet access is about 54%, and countries like Germany is like 90%. So it just measures those that have access. So we're probably looking at high-end people anyway. What about you, Just? Did that surprise you a little bit?
It is surprising that in terms of numbers, just over half the population have access to social media, and yet they spend so much time on it. And the question is, what exactly are they looking at? What exactly are they working on? during those 8 hours or so. It's a third of their day that they spend on social media.
So we're going to explore what that might mean for journalism. Has that changed and shifted journalism? And one person who perhaps might have an idea how it's affected her is a legal journalist with Tiso Blackstar, now joined on the line by Karen Morn. Karen, thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the program. So give us your thoughts about this amazing number of people that use the internet. And I know that you tweet regularly. 325,000 followers must mean people are looking to you for information. Has that affected how you do your job as a journalist?
I think it does. Just excuse the ambient noise in the background. I'm at the mid-mile. But I think it does, because if you want to grow a following as a journalist, it's about breaking news first, but I think it's about, more importantly, breaking news down accurately. At the moment, because there's such easy access for multiple people to essentially put information out there, what differentiates you as a reliable source of information is that you're correct with the facts that you put out there. And I think that's one of the things that's so important, is managing that tension between being the first to put out information and being also the first to get that information correct. Because if you do get stuff wrong, it can really irretrievably damage your brand as a reputable journalist.
All right, so let's chat a little bit about people seeking journalists out as a source of news. I remember when the February 14 murder of Reeva Steenkamp, Oscar Pistorius, I saw a huge jump in the following of journalists, even from far afield as, you know, the US and Germany, etc., etc. And it seemed as if people wanted information and certain names started to come through. Was that an indication of where people are seeking their information in a different way?
Because you see, the thing is with Twitter is it's so immediate. I mean, people, I think it's changed. I think Twitter as a medium will change. But in those days, it was very much about, I'm hearing this, I'm putting it out on Twitter. And in the beginning stages of the Oscar Pistorius story, as it was unfolding, that shooting happening in the early hours of the morning, it was really on Twitter that the story started breaking and more information came out. So people who were deeply curious about what had happened weren't necessarily getting their information from traditional news sources that were far more staid and measured in getting verification for everything before that information came out. They were far more intent on being the first to know, knowing what was happening as it was happening. And I think that's what saw the huge spike in numbers. And also, a lot of the British media and British personalities were very interested in South African journalists and began actively retweeting them. And so, I mean, for instance, myself, Barry Bateman, Mandy Wiener, those kind of people saw big spikes in their Twitter following numbers because of that.
All right. So, and then finally, how do you balance then your job as a mostly print journalist and this need to update people constantly, because they're there? You know, the Bosasa Commission or State Capture Commission is happening. You're there. They're expecting you now, I guess, to be giving them information in real time.
I think what's changed is that live tweeting aspect has been somewhat diminished because people can watch the commission on the TV. What they want is real insight, like what is actually happening, what does this mean? And that certainly means that when you tweet, you have to be far more considerate about the repercussions, possibly bring in extraneous information that wouldn't be immediately available to a live TV audience. But also, if you have an exclusive story and you can hold it back, use Twitter as a mechanism to break the story and then drive traffic to the website of your respective media organization. So it's not necessarily one or the other. You can use both to promote each other. But again, it's about being correct in what you're saying and making sure that your news is accurate and verifiable.
All right, Karen Morn, thanks so much indeed. The fact that you're on the phone means you're not in the water at the Mid-Mama, but have a great time there. Thanks so much indeed for joining us.
Bye.
Okay, so that's Karen Morn, 325,000 followers, and she talked about this spike that happened with Reeva Steenkamp and Oscar Pistorius in that fateful February 14. So this technology is definitely disrupting things, isn't it? I mean, all of a sudden there was another vehicle to get news, and immediacy, I guess, is kind of what's prompted that.
I mean, what I found really interesting about this research is that if you look at Twitter, although we're spending a lot of time on the internet, Twitter usage has gone down by about 27% in South Africa. So your audience is even shifting around platform to platform, which journalists and media need to keep up with. But also, we are in a very unique situation where we spend we spend a significant amount of time online, yet almost half our population is offline. So media and journalists have to be able to balance accessing their audience online, but also accessing the audience who are offline. And that's very difficult.
Joss, one thing that I saw, and I'm going to use a British survey just by way of example, because I don't know what the figures are here in this country, but what was clear is when they split it into age groups, and they asked specifically, what's your main source of news? People aged between 18 and 24, 84% used online, including social media. And then people above 40, it was between 49 and 54% using television as their main source of media. So I guess it really speaks to a generational thing, and that, you know, if you're a journalist, you have to think about who you're talking to with which media.
It has always been a challenge in journalism to say who is your audience. And now that the waters have been muddied by social media, it has become even more so. The role of your traditional newspapers has changed. It has had to change because of the pressure from social media. Newspapers can no longer break stories. Newspapers can no longer talk about exclusivity. They can no longer say, it's rare to say this is an exclusive story that we are running with, because the newspapers will come maybe 24 hours later, maybe 18 hours later, as in the case of the Oscar Pistorius story. So the issue of immediacy is coming in. And with the numbers that we have shown there, obviously more youths, students probably, younger people in South Africa, younger professionals in South Africa, obviously they've got access. So they are already having the news right on their fingertips before your traditional media can have that. The older generation, perhaps they are at home.
Old habits die hard.
Perhaps they are at home, they watch television later at night. So you can see that split, that the younger people, they are students, they are younger professionals, they are always, at all times, they are on their phones and on their iPads and so on. So clearly there is that shift of how this new media is being used. All
right, and then perhaps finally, because we're running out of time, I guess what it speaks to as well is how you chunk the content, because social media, you don't want long, meaningful, thoughtful pieces, right? Whereas in the mainstream media, you probably do want a bit more analysis and a bit more words. So as journalists, again, audience and the type of writing or the type of newsing that you're doing.
Well, I mean, if people are spending so much time online, what are they doing if they're not reading? You know,
looking at pictures.
Exactly. So there are very creative ways of getting your story across, where people still consume the information they need to in a short amount of time. And again, because the platforms are constantly changing, media need to keep up with that. And I do think it's safe to say that we are going to see a continual increase in access to the internet. So this isn't something that's just going to go away. We need to embrace it and use it.
Fascinating. I wonder what it means for strategists going forward. Where are we going to be in 5 years' time? Anyway, we're going to take a quick break, and I can tell you where we'll be in a couple of minutes' time, and that will be looking at dominance in the subscription television market.
We're going to introduce you to a group of folks whose lives have been changed by a magical number, 1 million. Each of them, through creativity, lots of hard work, and a bit of luck, has started a $1 million business, in some cases close to $100 million in revenue. And they've all done it by taking an otherwise ordinary idea and turning it into an extraordinary success story.
How I Made My Millions, Mondays at 8:30 on 3.
I use my name
First and foremost, that's all I heard. And from using the name, I got a small loan of 8,000 rand.
I remember there is a time la sa zama kumfunela umsebenzi.
And be like, oh, praise God, hallelujah.
Someday will come and say, praise God. Abantuanu says what? Hallelujah.
Gospel of love is mine. Let me hear you say, victory.
Gospel Unplugged, Sundays at 5:30 only on SABC 1.
On Network, we have gadgets, robots, and more.
A phone is no longer just an indulgent device or a functional device. It's a part of us.
What if 20 years from now, robots walk the streets alongside humans, doing many of the same jobs that you and I do today?
We find out what you mostly use your laptops for. Is it gaming or good old writing?
Education in the end must prepare young people for the workplace that is being rapidly transformed by technological change.
A new security system, Memeza, is adding a new dimension of safety, with some elderly people saying they feel much safer.
I think a big thing for people is they're just not aware of electric vehicles. They might not realize they're probably a lot easier to incorporate into their driving needs.
There's technology and social media news on Network every Saturday at 8:30 p.m. and every Sunday at 5:30 p.m.
Peep into the world where families deal with lies, deceit, share their hopes and dreams. It's the battle for power as usual for the Morokas and Mabasos. In your most loved soapy, Generations the Legacy at 8 p.m. Monday to Friday, only on SABC 1, Mzansi for sure.
Welcome back. You're watching Media Monitor. Now, the Competition Commission announced earlier this week that it would not be pursuing complaints against MultiChoice and SuperSport, though it does note that there are still big problems in the subscription television market. In a statement, the Commission said that between 2012 and 2017, it received various complaints of abuse of dominance against MultiChoice and SuperSport, and that it would not prosecute because there didn't seem to be a reasonable prospect of success, and regulatory intervention would be more effective. Well, to tell us what that regulatory intervention might be, I'm now joined by Head of Communications at the Competition Commission, Sipho Ngwema. Thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Peter, good morning, and thanks for having me on the program.
All right, let's start a little bit about what were the nature of the complaints. I think everybody understands who MultiChoice, DSTV are, and SuperSport with their, 9, 10 channels, whatever it might be. What were the nature of the complaints from the people that alerted you?
There were a number of complaints. Of course, there will be complaints from your ordinary consumers in terms of what they can choose, what they are paying for, and they say what they are paying for is not what they want. They would want a much more targeted choice in terms of the channels that they want to watch. But also you have got other players in the market who would want to take part, for example, in sports contracts, who would want to take part in a number of areas. If you talk about decoders, for example, they would want to get into the business, and they think that there's monopoly enjoyed by a MultiChoice in terms of that particular sector. So those are generally the comments that or the complaints that we are receiving.
So did you see it as a dominance or an abuse of power, as it were?
Look, if there was an abuse of dominance, of course, we would then investigate that particular, because it is an offense in terms of the Competition Act. However, as you highlighted earlier, is that we are concerned about the concentration. We are here, there's only one dominant player in the industry, and we think that that is not good for competition, that is not good for consumers, but also many other things that flow from there, because the barriers to entry are high in terms of capital, in terms of licensing and other related issues. But also then there is no credible alternative that people who are selling products like in sports or any other content that they would want to sell, there's only one player basically that they must go to. And that's not good for competition, because once you have one dominant player, and that player can then call whatever price that they want to do and whatever conditions that they want.
Okay, so then you're not prosecuting, you're still concerned about market failure, I think you termed it. What do you do then? What's the other way to go around this?
Fortunately, ICASA is looking at the matter. They are doing an inquiry, and we are interacting. We have a memorandum of understanding with ICASA. So we are going to then interact with ICASA in terms of, we have started already, in terms of that process, to make sure that our concerns are taken into account. We have got confidence that ICASA is capable of taking into account of our concerns, and in the process of trying to resolve whatever issues are there in terms of ICASA being a regulator of this particular sector. They should, including some of the complaints or all the complaints that the consumers have raised and the service providers. We think that the process undertaken by ICASA should be able to deal with those.
All right, so interestingly, the CEO of MultiChoice South Africa, Calvo Mawela, last year already said, hang on, you know, this is a great idea to have this inquiry, but it's about 15 years too late because the technology has disrupted the playing field. People are moving away from subscription television, and we're seeing the Netflix, YouTube channels coming in. And so he's saying, you know, actually, there's no much point to this inquiry anymore. We are being competed upon by these new platforms.
Yes, indeed. Look, given what is happening in social media, given also what is happening in digital media, we have got a lot of other entrants. However, ICASA has to go through what they're going through in order for them to establish the facts and come up with recommendations. But also you must remember, there was a move towards desktops between, in fact, the government and the SABC, and that was suddenly abandoned, and we are investigating that matter between MultiChoice and SABC. So there are a number of things that one has to look at, because at the end of the day, you need more players in the market. You need to deal with the barriers to entry. You need to deal with all the intricacies that are taking place there, so that the consumer has got more choice, but also other service providers are able to come and play into the market.
MultiChoice also say that, hang on, but by trying to restrict MultiChoice domestically, what you're actually doing is making it easier for people like Netflix and from other parts of the world who don't have to abide by the rules and the laws in South Africa. So you're actually prejudicing a homegrown product and advantaging international products who'll just get on with it and don't care what you think.
Look, those comments I'm sure ICASA will take into account. Whatever regime that they come up with, it will be a regime that is good for our market, a regime that is good for the consumer and the players. But we must remember, particularly us from the competition point of view, we are able, through our international partners, to deal with the dominance of very many of these entities. So I'm sure there is a way. For example, companies like Google, Facebook, they are subject to competition rules internationally, and we're able to charge many of international players anywhere in the world. We've done that in South Africa. So I'm sure even in the regulatory industry where ICASA is concerned, they should be able to deal with it. I don't think that MultiChoice should panic. I think they should wait for the process, so that whatever recommendations that they should be able to see whether or not they are conducive for the South African conditions.
All right, before I bring in my other guests, just a quick one for you. We had the State of the Nation address recently, and the President talked about an amendment to the competition bill. Your thoughts and reactions to that?
Indeed, the Department of Economic Development has pioneered amendments which We are hoping that they are going to be enacted as soon as possible. Those amendments should be able to assist in one way or the other for us to be able to deal with very many of our concerns, particularly around issues of concentration. We know that South Africa is a highly concentrated, or has got high levels of concentration given our past. And this is what we are trying to do. And I'm sure all the interventions that are needed, we need them in order for us to be able to address what exactly we are talking about now, that there are industries that are highly concentrated, and as a result, consumers and other role players, they suffer.
All right, okay, let me bring you guys in. So, Supersport Multi-Choice, 30 years ago, whatever it was, came into a market that didn't exist, took huge risks, and for a long time they were losing tons of cash. Are they being unfairly prejudiced for taking risks back in the day and setting up a business and investing for so many years, huge amounts of infrastructure, for other people to come in later on and say, hang on, you're not playing fair?
Maybe they are the victims of their own success. You know, the belief is that they were favored when Mnet was established, and then later on it established Supersport. It made money, and it's still making billions and billions of money every year. This is making it difficult for the likes of the SABC, ETV, and other players to come in and compete, especially when it comes to sport broadcast rights, because they are super expensive. Whether it is local football, whether it is Bafana Bafana, whether it is international sports, rugby, whether it's cricket, whether it's boxing, whether it's motorsport, those sporting rights are very expensive. And it does makes it very, very difficult for cash-strapped organizations like SABC to compete on an equal footing with Multi-Choice, with its millions that are available and its ability to generate income from advertising and from huge amounts from subscriptions.
Yeah.
It is very much on a good footing, whereas the others are hampered by lack of cash to compete.
Tandy, has the viewer been affected, do you think, or potential viewers, by the fact that there's this dominant player offering all the products on the shelf?
Absolutely. I think at the end of this whole thing it's about the consumer. We're dealing with an industry that is linked to, I mean, the sporting industry overall is I don't know a huge amount about it, but what we do know is that the money that goes on and gets pushed around the industry is unbelievable. And whatever we do with our broadcasting licenses around that sport is also going to have an impact on that sporting industry. So there's a whole lot of, I think, very complicated issues at play here. And at the end of the day, the consumer is the one who bears the brunt of it. And, you know, just to point out that SABC is still the most accessed broadcast, well, the most watched broadcaster with audiences in the country that don't have the rights to broadcast, you know, sporting content, which is of national interest. So something has to be done. And what that is, I think, yeah, it's good luck to trying to find that out.
It is a difficult one, Sipho, because on the one hand, you've got you know, Jabu Sitole in Nkandla, who can't afford pay television but wants to watch an international match between South Africa and Argentina, let's say. On the other, you've got a lot of these sporting bodies who say, if we don't get the television money, we are going to collapse. We're not going to be able to develop talent. We're not going to be able to build the sport. How do you balance the two then with this idea of competition is important?
Peter, going back firstly to the question that you asked, you must remember, you have this in a number of areas. Health has got one of those problems where, to what extent do we introduce generics? But I think the investment must be quantified. And I think there must be a limit in terms of the first mover's advantage has to be assessed and say, up to this point, you probably have recouped the money that you have invested. But coming back to your question, indeed, and I think there was a lot of excitement when there was a talk about desktops coming, top boxes coming and being going to be distributed to everybody, because we are introducing another competition to to multi-choice. Part of the problem now is that you only have multi-choice. And I suspect that maybe some of the sports codes can say the contract that we have is not worth the product that we are giving them. But because they are the only player, you can't shop around. But I think with time, the more role players you have, the more other sports channels you have, they can then give different offerings. And then you can see a contract shifting, because part of the other problem now is that the contracts with multi-sport are long. And we have been saying in all the other sectors, you must shorten your contracts in order to make sure that there's competition. Have a tender. But if you tender now in terms of sports rights, probably it's going to be between the SABC and multi-choice. And we know the situation with SABC and finances. They cannot. In fact, you have now a stalemate, I think, with Bafana and so on in terms of broadcast because of resource issues. So when you introduce more players in the industry, there would be, but hopefully that they are going to have financial muscle. And then we are giving options to the sports codes to ever is supplying content to the incumbent. And now you have got one player, they get call the shots.
Okay, I mean, this is a complex issue with many layers, and will take quite a bit of sorting out, particularly with technology disrupting the equation all the time. Sipongwema, it's been a pleasure having you. Thanks so much indeed for joining us on the program today.
Peter, thank you. I appreciate being here. Thanks.
All right, yeah, huge complications in paid television. And in fact, we're seeing also another disruption where the sporting codes themselves are going straight to the customer. Recently, Formula One is offering packages via online to customers and bypassing the producers and the broadcasters completely. Anyway, we'll take a look at the newspapers after this break. Stay with us.
We at Network explore all things technological.
The modern battlefield is the battlefield of the mind, and the tools for affecting the mind are social media.
We look at how technology advances medicine and education.
Children can learn up to 60% more information in a shorter condensed amount of time using virtual reality as a medium for instruction.
From music, gaming, even computer-generated supermodels. Be a part of our network Saturdays at 8:30 p.m. and Sundays at 5:30 p.m.
My world is natural and unexplored. There is an inner urge to seek beyond the unseen. Many have heard of it, but few have seen it.
Very real. This is what Africa's about.
Beneath the sea, over the mountains, on and off the grid, we awaken the human desire. Slowly but surely, come ride with us. Going nowhere slowly. On DSTV channel 156, SABC Anchor.
Right, it's time for us to take a look at the newspapers, and we start with our new feature, and that's getting an international view of our front pages from a country on the continent. And today we go to Maseru in Lesotho, and taking us through the headlines there is journalist Ntakwana Ngatane. Thanks very much for joining us, Ntakwana. So you have 3 newspapers that you want to take us through, and they're not all weekend papers. It's a slightly different scenario in Lesotho.
It is, Peter, because we only have weekly newspapers in Lesotho. There's only one Sunday paper. The other papers come out on Friday, Thursday, Tuesday, and so on. But all of them come out once a week. But essentially what I have for you to start with is the Sunday Express, which talks about ABC chaos continues. And of course, ABC is the party of the Prime Minister, the Obasotho Convention, and it went to its elective conference last weekend. And if you look at all the papers, really, let me talk about the papers before I get into the subject. Because if you look at all the papers...
Do you want to just lift up the paper in front of you so we can see the cover and what it looks like?
Sure.
All
Well,
right.
this is the Sunday Express, and it talks about ABC chaos continues. And the second one that I'll look at is the Public Eye, which talks about why polls divided ABC. And the third one that I'm going to look at is the Lesotho Times, which talks about Mahau speaks on victory. Now, all these three papers, Peter, are talking about the Prime Minister's party, the Lesotho Convention. It went to its elective conference last weekend. But of course, there's been a lot of drama around this conference because, first of all, there is a contested outcome. Let's start here. The person who was contesting the position of deputy leader, Professor Mahau, who's the brother of the well-known former army commander of Lesotho, Mahau, who was slain in 2015, was not the preferred candidate of the leader, Thomas Thabane. But of course, he went to court, eventually won and contested and won the election. But of course, the outgoing NEC of the party says that there are contestations around that. The counting went on. The conference was not concluded. Even as we speak, it is still open because it was not closed. The candidates or the delegates that had gone to that conference were dispersed by police before the actual official closing and the handover to the new NEC. So there is a lot of chaos around what should happen next. But of course, the other issue is that should the ABC have problems, because this is a four-party coalition in Lesotho that is led by the Lesotho Convention, should the party have problems, might by extension mean that the coalition government will have problems, and it might mean that the coalition government in parliament might lose the support that gave it the power to be in government. So the reason why all these papers are interested in what's going on inside the ABC and all of that chaos is because it has implications for the stability and the togetherness of the government in Lesotho, which is why we're seeing all of these stories. But of course, the leader of the ABC and Prime Minister Tom Thabane continues to say that there is nothing wrong in the party. This is just a democratic process that's going on. The outgoing Secretary General, Samunyani Nsekele, continues to say that what is happening at the moment is that the party is waiting for that conference to be closed and the handover to be done so that the new NEC can take over. But of course, the new NEC, during this past week, we saw them holding a press conference trying to introduce themselves to the media. And when they tried to do that, the office of the party was closed to them. It was locked. So they had to hold a media briefing outside the offices of the party. So this is the chaos that we're talking about when we talk about the chaos.
Fascinating. So party politics dominating there. But perhaps as a final question, are Basotho avid readers of newspapers? Is that their main source of information? I suppose radio is the other one. But are these newspapers that you've spoken about flying off the shelves, as it were?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say so, Peter. I think the most popular medium in Lesotho is radio. This is where people get on and talk for hours and hours and hours. Unlike, in South Africa, where you have, if it's a current affairs show, people are speaking for like 30 seconds or 1 minute. Here, people can speak for almost an hour on radio. So it's quite a popular medium in Lesotho. The other medium that's becoming quite popular is social media, particularly Facebook. So a lot of these discussions happen on Facebook and happen on social media even before they get to the newspaper. So the newspapers really come out with what you can call analysis, because I've seen that also inside the Sunday Express. They're talking about how Thabane and Mahau need each other to keep the party together. And so a lot of what you find in the newspapers will be analysis more than the actual current affairs of what's happening.
Ntakwana Ngazane, thanks very much indeed for joining us. That's a journalist in Lesotho there, taking us through the newspapers there, mostly weeklies, and I guess that makes sense for the size of the country and the nature of their stories. Coming back home to South Africa, not surprisingly, through every week it's now one theme that keeps coming through, isn't it? Bosasa, corruption, state capture. What else did you see? What do you want to comment? Let's start with you, Tandy.
No, you're absolutely right. Bosasa and state capture have been a theme that we've seen, and it's exhausting as well. I mean, yes, it's of absolute importance, but it's almost as if nothing else is happening in the country. You know, I'm having a look at City Press, and obviously because we've had the State of the Nation address during the week, you know, we've turned our attention to some of what came out in Sonar. But so we've got City Press looking at Cyril trims the fat, looking at merging ministries, cutting staff, reducing number of provinces who are part of these extreme changes. But what we're not seeing is the issue that, you know, for something that doesn't often get mentioned was gender-based violence that we saw being mentioned and dealt with in Sonar. You know, the fact that we're dealing with close to 4,000 schools that don't have adequate sanitation, and yes, there are programs and processes being implemented with that, but I mean, those don't even feature in the first couple of pages of the Sunday papers. And you would really hope that those would be the kind of stories that we really take the time to unpack and examine and come out in something like this, especially because it's, you know, it's something that people have been talking about given Sonar. But again, we are, you know, reporting on ourselves as the media industry, as we will see, and politics.
Just which paper grabbed your attention?
What is fascinating for me is how quickly the news cycle goes. We had the Sonar on Thursday evening, and interestingly, none of these newspapers, the main ones, Sunday Times and City Press, none of them are making any direct reference to Sonar. In fact, the Sunday Times has gone completely different with the
So this is the front page of the Sunday Times now?
Yes. Some are saying that this is a personal war between Dr. Seve's independent newspapers and Tiso Black Stars, who own Sunday Times. City Press has gone with Cyril trims the fat, a story that is also featuring on page 4 of Sunday Times / bloated cabinet drop deputies. It is interesting that they have gone this route and they are not making any reference. Perhaps further inside there's analysis of the president's State of the Nation address. But it shows you that in South Africa, the news is traveling very, very, very fast. And this is also impacted and influenced by social media. I mean, the minute the president was speaking, everybody was spreading the word. When he mentioned that the elections will be on the 18th of May, within seconds, it was all over social media. So no one else could have come back with that a day later to say Cyril announces the date for the election. You will be so many hours late and you will be so irrelevant. Again, it shows the impact of social media.
All right, so yesterday, an interesting incident. ANC election manifesto launch in Eastern Cape, and the Minister of Information Communications tried to stop the SABC filming an incident that was taking place there. Paul Mashatile was trying to address the audience, and what happened was there were people saying this is not going to happen whilst we don't have service delivery, and the minister put her hand in front of the camera. Your thoughts? I mean, that's not helpful.
I was horrified when I saw that video. I mean, I was you know, it saddened me very much, honestly. And I mean, also, I think just to take the moment to you know, commend the journalists for first of all publishing the video, and then the SABC for covering it. It shows a very different position that the broadcast is in compared to, you know, 2 years ago. But still, to have that sort of blatant censorship is unbelievable. And yes, the minister has, you know, issued a statement of apology. But I mean, it does not speak to the gravity of the situation that we see, and especially in the lead up to elections. This is just, it's not on. It needs to be taken far more seriously. I think that what we're seeing, well, in 2016, we saw the first instances of biased reporting coming out of the SABC, and SABC is known for its brilliant reporting during an election period because it's the public broadcast, and this has come out of, you know, our years and years of monitoring the SABC's coverage of an election period. 2016, you find the first instance of biased reporting, and now we just see blatant censorship. yeah, it's something that I think we need to be very careful about, and I don't know, put measures in place to not have this a repeat.
All right, okay, so lots to talk about as always, but not always enough time. But social media, we talked about it. Let's see what people were engaging with on social media this past week.
SABCnews.com is your one-stop digital portal to all the news you need.
Let's look at what has happened online this week, but first, social media trends with Tonya Curry.
My name is Tonya Curry, and I'm the Director of Acumen Media. Last night, many were glued to their TV and Twitter feeds to watch the SONA address by President Ramaphosa. Many expected the EFF to disrupt Parliament, but the President's opening gambit left Malema laughing and the EFF mute. Accolades poured in for the President as many were unaware of the enormous level of work that has already taken place in the space of a year. Others were disappointed that we had a dignified SONA. Go figure. Highlights from the address definitely included the reinvented scorpions and also the fact that the President made it very clear that Eskom would be handled in a very different manner going forward. And those two things made a very big impact in the conversation. Black First Land First tried their very best to make an impact in the media this week, and they did, both with the outrageous comments surrounding the Driehoek tragedy and their support for Bushiri. It was also rumoured that they'll be laying charges against Ramaphosa because of the 500,000 rand from Bosasa. State capture, still on the charts, saw Adrian Basson take the stand to set the record straight, and if you can believe it, Supra Mahamapelo is back with his winning court boosting the conversation there. Finally, we saw the Hawks take action after several members of the Bosasa scandal were arrested, and T handed himself in, and many of us left asking, where is Gavin Watson? Elections 2019 continues to fill timelines. EFF manifesto left many thinking Malema was filled with the outrageously good promises, but that they might be empty. Many questions followed about how on earth the EFF would manage to deliver on such a manifesto. The tragedy at Driehoek and the Sansui slap made their mark on the charts this week as well. And Eskom, everyone's favourite SEO, was a large focus of SONA, and that comes in at the bottom of the pile.
With a website that is easy to use on mobile, SABC News prides itself in being the primary source of public service content across multiple platforms.
And now for the top stories on the SABC News website as liked by users. The story about board members of the PIC resigning pulled traffic to the SABC News website. Another story is that pulled traffic to the SABC News website were stories about Prophet Bushiri. The arrest of the self-proclaimed Prophet Shepherd Bushiri and his wife pulled traffic to the SABC News website. The pair has since been granted a 100,000 rand bail each. That's all for you looking to cyberspace this week. For SABC News, I'm Tsepiso Muche in Johannesburg.
SABC News, everywhere.
Okay, so I don't even know where to begin. I can't believe all of that happened just in this last week. Did anything grab your attention that the social media users latched onto? Let's start with you, Joss.
Well, I think the debate around the State of the Nation address is still going to be with us. The opposition political parties must now come with their replying debates soon. The budget is also coming very, very soon. That's also going to be a talking point. The likes of the Bushiri saga, I think I see there are new allegations that the church has also been accused of taking money from people in the name of investments. But apparently the money didn't go back to the investors. The money went back into the church. So people are starting to claim their money. Others have laid charges wanting their money back.
And it's quite sad because the churches are supposed to be where we find trust and solace, and there were a lot of stories, and I don't even know where to start. But I suppose Parliament, a lot of people talking about the hot clap that one of the policemen got from the EFF outside. Is that a moment that people think, I wasn't sure who to vote for, maybe that might affect the vote, or no?
I mean, I think that we're going to get a lot of those moments over the next few months of, let me vote for, wait, let me change my mind. I think that's an existential, question we're dealing with at the moment. But, you know, it was almost like, oh, there it is, EFF have done something. But I mean, also for reasons that need to be unpacked as well. We need to, you know, get the sides of the stories about why the incident happened. And I think we have been getting, you know, a bit of that being unpacked. But you know, just some other things that stood out is the issue with the BLF commenting on the Driehoek school
that was
statement.
shocking.
That was also, I mean, shocking, and that's going to, I think, also not fall off the agenda anytime soon, with good reason as well.
All right, so you know, you mentioned that, and I keep going back to this thing about, especially Twitter. It's not totally representative of the universe, but what frightens me now more and more is that voices of reason are being drowned out by extremist views. And so one can get a distorted picture of what South Africans really feel if all you do is follow Twitter.
It goes back to the issue of accessibility. Who has got access to this particular medium? And I must say some parties are using it very, very effectively. At least the supporters or the members of those parties, they are using that medium very, very effectively. There's a lot of howling there. There's a lot of what you can call unreasonable comments, unpoliced comments. There is no accountability on Twitter. You can very much say what you want to say without any fear. And the problem is, how do you deal with that? You cannot censor it, because this country is a free media type country. All that can happen is that perhaps when we make statements, when we make public pronouncement, we need to be measured without having to make inflammatory statements, without having to make statements that might incite violence, that might incite hatred, that might promote racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, for example. It's a question of personal use. It's a question of what kind of message do I want to put out there.
All right, so you started to give us a hint a little bit earlier on, but let me start with you, Thandi. What will we be looking at, do you think, in the week ahead? What's likely to be big stories?
I mean, I think definitely the Bosasa scandal and the Zondo Commission inquiry. We're going to see more, you know, hot issues coming out of that.
Was Gwede Mantashe's tour enough of his house? was that enough, do you think?
But I also think that we've got the State of the Province addresses coming up. Those, I think, are scheduled to start this week sometime. And I think there's going to be a big push towards, you know, getting the last voters registered before the proclamation date sets in.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to see we're going to see a lot of more of the same, I think.
And there's the so-called EFF assassinated plot as well.
Oh my goodness!
Apparently, charges were laid against the so-called assassinators. It should come to the fore. What exactly was this all about? Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to thank you both very much indeed for joining us on the program. Always great having you. And if last week is anything to go by, I think we've got quite a week ahead of us in terms of the news cycle. But thanks indeed for your insights, Thandi Smith and Joss Charlie. Thanks so much indeed. All right, and thank you for watching Media Monitor at home. I hope you enjoyed the program as much as we did. Join us again at the same time next week for more of the same. Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Everyone wants a dignified funeral.
That is what a clientele funeral plan can give you. Lasting dignity.
I just want my family to be there, all relaxed, not worrying about paying for anything, knowing that clientele covered everything.
I would like a dignified funeral, and the rest should be invested for my children's future.
Clientele funeral plans pay out in 24 hours. We will even send 200 Rand airtime. You can cover up to 13 people on one plan. Plans include grocery, unveiling, and transport benefit. Plus, you can get all your premiums back.
I told my family, I don't want a fancy funeral. They must come there for a cook sister and a sandwich, and then they must use the rest of the money for their future.
I will never stop paying my monthly premium.
To me, paying my monthly premium is as important as buying groceries.
SMS LIFE to 31043 and we'll call you back.
It's all things gangster and power in the kingdom of Kwamashu as two families immerse in the contradictory world of church and crime. Uzalo, weekdays at 8:30 p.m. on SABC 1. Mzansi, for sure.
We are outside Liar School, Swaziareneke, where members are picketing against a picture that went viral.
What else do you want to see happen in a country?
Peace, security, and respect of human rights.
It's a bit nervous because it's a new start, it's a new environment.
I'm looking forward to learning new things.
Ignostoka na uesa mahla.